My name is Ethan Walker, and for the last decade, I've built my life around my career as a civil engineer. Long hours, endless meetings, tight deadlines, and a never-ending stream of projects. It's the kind of work that demands everything you've got, and I gave it all. But through it all, there was one thing that made it worth it: Claire. We met in college, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was the one. She was ambitious, driven, and like me, focused on making something of herself. But we were partners. I didn't mind putting in the extra hours at work if it meant she could focus on her studies. We'd been together since then, building a life based on mutual respect and support. At least, that's what I thought. When Claire got accepted into the architecture program, it was a huge win, but I also knew it would mean sacrifices. Her dreams were big, and mine could wait. I told myself it was temporary, that once she finished school and settled into her career, we'd have the time to focus on each other again. But that never really came. As her career took off, so did the distance between us. She became more consumed with work, and I found myself working longer hours just to keep things afloat. There was a part of me that thought maybe this was just the phase before everything balanced out, that she'd remember what we had and make the time for us again. But as I watched her excel, gaining recognition and praise, I began to wonder if I was becoming a secondary part of her life, someone who was there when it was convenient, but no longer essential to her success. The day she handed me the divorce papers was the same day she was promoted to senior architect. I walked in from a meeting, my shoulders aching from carrying the weight of the day, and there they were, sitting on the coffee table. Divorce papers. I didn't even have to look twice to know what they were. Claire was sitting on the couch, holding a glass of wine, her eyes focused on the television screen like nothing was happening. I wanted to scream, to ask what the hell was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I just stood there, frozen. Her calmness threw me off. How could she be so composed when she was about to destroy everything we had? "I thought you'd be happy for me," she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of something I couldn't place. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't even really talking to me, just saying words that didn't feel like they were meant for me at all. "I got the promotion I've been working so hard for. It's just a new chapter, Ethan. I need a clean break." I stared at the papers, unable to process what was happening. Here was the woman I'd supported, the woman I'd put my own dreams on hold for, and she was giving up on us. I tried to speak, but my voice felt like it was stuck in my throat. The confusion and betrayal boiled up in me, but I kept my cool. "Claire, when did this happen?" I asked quietly. Her sigh was heavy, like I was asking a question I should already know the answer to. "It's been coming for a while," she said, like she'd been preparing for this moment long before today. "I just didn't know how to tell you." I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to beg her to stay. She'd already made up her mind, and I could feel it. The decision was made, and I was just the last one to know. I picked up the pen and signed the papers without thinking, my hand shaking slightly as I did. I didn't even read them. What was the point? There was no going back, and even if I fought it, it wouldn't matter. It was over. She handed me the papers, and I handed her the last remnants of my hope. That was it. I had nothing left to say. The next few days blurred into one long, empty stretch of silence. I barely spoke to Claire after that night. She stayed in the apartment, likely organizing her next steps in a life that didn't involve me, and I started to pack up what was left of mine. I didn't fight her for the furniture or the little trinkets we'd picked up together. I didn't want any of it. I wanted out. I wanted to be far from the place that held so many memories I couldn't keep if I wanted to move on. So I started with the easy things: clothes, books, personal items. They went into boxes, one by one, each piece of my life fading into something more manageable, less meaningful. My hands were steady as I packed, but inside, everything felt like it was unraveling. As I worked, the silence around me was deafening. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. A part of me hoped that Claire would come to her senses and try to fix things, but the longer I worked, the more I realized she was already gone. She hadn't been with me for months, not in the way we used to be. Even when we were together, we were apart. I'd come home after long hours at work, only to find her immersed in her own world. Her phone calls, her late nights at the office, the endless meetings she attended, it all pointed to one thing. She had moved on long before she handed me those papers. I had just been too blind to see it. That thought lingered in my mind as I loaded the last of my things into the car. My phone buzzed, and I looked down at the screen to see a message from Sarah. She was my best friend, the one who had always been there, and I knew she'd heard about the divorce. "Ethan, I just heard," the message began. "I'm coming over." I stared at the words for a moment, my chest tightening. I didn't want to deal with anyone, not even Sarah. I didn't want sympathy, and I didn't want to talk about it. What was there to say anyway? I'd been a fool, but I couldn't ignore her. She had seen me at my best and worst, and I knew she only wanted to help. Still, I had no energy for comfort or explanations. I didn't want to explain what had happened because, frankly, I didn't understand it myself. "Don't," I texted back. "I don't need sympathy right now." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "Ethan, I'm your friend. You don't have to go through this alone." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words. She was right, of course, but I wasn't ready. I couldn't bear the thought of telling her what had happened. Not yet. I needed space to breathe, to figure out what came next. I didn't want to lean on anyone, even her. So I ignored her message and kept loading the car, doing what I always did, putting one foot in front of the other, trying to keep moving forward. I drove away from the apartment with nothing but a few boxes and a heavy heart. As I passed the streets we used to walk together, memories hit me in waves. The coffee shop where we'd spent lazy Sunday mornings, the park where we'd sat and talked about our future, the places that were once so familiar now felt foreign. I was leaving the life I had built for her, but it wasn't just my life I was leaving behind. It was us. The partnership I thought we'd always have. The trust I had in her, in us, was shattered, and all that was left was the empty space between us. For the next few days, I locked myself away in a cabin I rented up in the mountains, far away from the city, far away from everything. It was a place I could breathe without worrying about the past or what the future might bring. Alone in the cabin, I had no distractions, no demands, just the sound of my own thoughts. It was painful, but it was necessary. I needed the time to process, to figure out how I could possibly rebuild after everything had fallen apart. Claire tried to contact me, of course. Texts, missed calls, even a letter. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. What was there to say? What could she possibly say that would make this better? The truth was, I had nothing left to give. She had already taken everything that mattered, and now she wanted to fix it? I wasn't interested in hearing her explanations. Not anymore. She had made her choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. So I didn't reply. I just stayed in that cabin, quiet, waiting for the dust to settle, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I would figure out what to do with a life that had been completely upended. 3 months passed in a blur. I threw myself into my work, trying to fill the empty spaces left by Claire's absence. The projects that had piled up during the divorce now demanded my attention, and I tackled them with a focus that was almost obsessive. I had become the guy who didn't stop working, who buried his pain in spreadsheets, calculations, and plans. But even as I buried myself in work, I couldn't escape the quiet hum of loneliness that settled over me. Every now and then, I'd find myself staring out the office window, wondering how it had all gone wrong. How did I end up here, alone, with nothing but my career and a broken heart? I kept busy, convinced that if I kept moving forward, I'd eventually outrun the hurt. But the truth was, it lingered. I would catch myself thinking of Claire, of the way she used to laugh when we'd cook together in the kitchen, or the way she'd curl up on the couch after a long day, her head resting on my shoulder. Those memories would hit me out of nowhere, and for a moment it felt like she was still there. But I would snap out of it, remind myself that she was gone. She had moved on, and I had to, too. Even so, part of me kept waiting for her to reach out, waiting for her to realize she made a mistake, waiting for a sign that maybe, just maybe, she still cared. But it didn't come. The silence stretched on, and I tried to convince myself that it was better this way. I wasn't the kind of person who needed to hold on to something that was already gone. Still, it hurt. And then one evening, when I least expected it, the phone rang. It was Claire. My heart skipped a beat, and I hesitated for a moment, staring at the screen. I hadn't heard from her in months. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward with my new life in Seattle. But another part of me, the part that had loved her for so long, wanted to hear her voice. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, but I answered. Ethan? Her voice was tentative, like she wasn't sure if I'd pick up. It had been months, but it felt like no time had passed at all. Can we talk? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything I'd been avoiding. I had moved on. I had rebuilt my life. But hearing her voice again brought everything rushing back. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady. Claire, I don't think there's anything to talk about. I've moved on. There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment I wondered if she'd hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice softer this time. I know, I needed to hear you say it. I've been thinking about everything, Ethan. I've been thinking about you, about us. I made a mistake. I leaned back in my chair, running my hand over my face. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had taken from me. But I didn't. I had learned the hard way that sometimes silence was the only answer. Claire, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm not that person anymore. I've moved on. I've built a life for myself, and I'm not looking back. There was a moment of quiet, and then she sighed. I understand, she said softly. I'm sorry, Ethan. I was wrong, but I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but it certainly wasn't that. Her apology felt empty, like it came too late. I could hear the regret in her voice, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make up for all the years I had given up for her, all the things I had sacrificed. I had spent so long trying to fix things, trying to make her see me, but I realized in that moment that I had been doing it all wrong. I had been chasing someone who didn't want to be found. I think it's best if we leave it here, Claire, I said, my voice steady, even though inside I felt a sharp sting. Goodbye. I hung up without waiting for a reply, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I had let go of the last thread that was tying me to her, and in doing so, I had freed myself. There was no more hope, no more waiting. I wasn't going to waste any more of my life on someone who had already chosen their path without me. It was over, and for the first time, I was okay with that. The days following that conversation with Claire were a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I had let go of something that had consumed my life for years, yet the space it left felt unfamiliar, like a hole I didn't know how to fill. It was the kind of emptiness that made you pause and question what you had been living for all along. But as the days passed, I began to realize something. I had been living for someone else. I had been so focused on Claire's success, on making her dreams come true, that I had forgotten about my own. I had buried my ambitions, my desires, beneath the weight of her needs, believing that one day we would both rise together. But I had been wrong. We weren't partners anymore. We hadn't been for a long time. I threw myself even deeper into my work. The projects I was managing were becoming more demanding, and I welcomed the challenge. There was something cathartic about losing myself in the details of each design, each project plan. It was the one place where I didn't have to think about anything else. I could just focus on getting things done. The days were long, and the work was hard. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for me. It felt good to make progress, without worrying about whether or not Claire would be proud of me, or if I was doing enough to help her succeed. The weight of her expectations had been heavy, but now I was free of them. I started spending my weekends in Seattle, exploring the city I had been too busy to enjoy before. I found little pockets of solitude in the chaos of the urban landscape, cafes where no one knew me, parks where I could just sit and watch the world go by. There was something soothing about not having to perform for anyone, not having to be anything other than myself. I met new people through work, people who were kind and genuine without the baggage of a failed marriage. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a life that wasn't based on anyone else's timeline or expectations. It was mine, and it felt good. One evening, as I was walking back to my apartment from a meeting, I passed a little bookstore tucked away on a quiet corner. The door was cracked open, and I could hear the soft hum of music playing inside. Without thinking, I stepped in. The smell of old paper and coffee filled the air, and I wandered down the aisles, letting my fingers brush against the spines of the books. I hadn't realized how much I missed the simple pleasure of getting lost in a good story. I picked up a book by a local author, one I'd never heard of, and spent the next hour sitting in a corner, reading and letting the world fall away. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with work or the past. I was just present in the moment, and it felt right. As the weeks went by, I kept discovering these small joys, taking long walks along the waterfront, cooking meals for myself, reconnecting with old friends. I wasn't trying to fill the void Claire had left. Instead, I was learning to live with it. I was discovering new things about myself, things I had neglected in the chaos of our relationship. I realized that I had always been so focused on being the person Claire needed that I had lost sight of who I really was. I had spent so much time trying to fix her, to support her, that I had forgotten to support myself. One Friday night, after a particularly challenging week at work, I sat on my balcony with a beer in hand, watching the sunset over the city. I thought back to the days when I was married to Claire, when we used to talk about our future, about growing old together. I wondered if she was happy now, if she had found what she was looking for. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that it didn't matter. I had moved on. I wasn't the same person who had signed those divorce papers. I had grown. I had built a life for myself, and it was just beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was open to whatever came next, whether it was more work, more self-discovery, or even a new relationship. I had learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to let go of what's holding you back, even if it's painful. And when you do, you realize that the only thing standing in your way is you. As I finished my beer and looked out at the city skyline, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. For the first time in years, I was truly free. A year had passed since the night Claire handed me those divorce papers, and in that time, I had transformed in ways I never thought possible. I had become someone I barely recognized at first, stronger, more independent, and more at peace with myself than I had ever been during our marriage. When I looked back at the man I used to be, I could hardly believe how much of myself I had given away, how much of my life I had sacrificed without even realizing it. But I had learned. I had learned the hard way, but I had learned, and I wasn't going back. Seattle had become home in a way I never expected. It was just a city, but it had become a place where I could breathe, where I could be me again. I had thrown myself into my work, yes, but it was different now. I wasn't just doing it for a paycheck or to prove something to anyone. I was doing it because I enjoyed it. I had earned the trust of my colleagues, and the recognition I received was for my ability to make things happen, to solve problems, to get results. It was satisfying, but it wasn't everything. I had learned that work could only fill so much of the void, and what really mattered was what I chose to do with my life outside of the office. One of the biggest surprises in this new chapter of my life was how much I had started to enjoy the little things. I started to appreciate the mundane, the everyday experiences that I had overlooked before. The quiet mornings with a cup of coffee, the small victories at work, the laughter with friends who cared for me and didn't expect anything in return. I had learned to savor the moments, rather than constantly waiting for something big, something dramatic to happen. I no longer needed a grand gesture to feel fulfilled. I was enough, just as I was. Of course, there were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I would ever truly get over the loss of my marriage. There were still days when I missed Claire, when I wished things had turned out differently. But those days became less frequent, and eventually, they faded into the background. I realized that while my love for her had once been all-encompassing, it had been based on an illusion of what we could be, rather than what we actually were. The truth was, we had grown apart long before the divorce. The woman I had loved was still somewhere in the world, but she was no longer the person I had built my life around, and I had to accept that. One evening, as I sat in a small cafe in Capitol Hill, reading a book I had picked up on a whim, I got a message from Sarah. It had been a while since we'd caught up. She had always been there for me, even when I hadn't wanted to hear it. I opened her message, curious about what she had to say. Hey, just checking in. How are you really doing? I've heard you're killing it at work, but I want to know how you are. I smiled at her words, grateful for her friendship. I quickly typed back. I'm good, Sarah. Really good. I'm building a life that's mine now, and for the first time in a long time, it feels like I'm on the right path. She responded almost immediately. I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You deserve all the good things coming your way. Her words were simple, but they hit me harder than I expected. It was as if in that moment, I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't the broken man I had been a year ago. I wasn't the person who was constantly waiting for approval or validation from someone else. I had found my own worth, my own sense of purpose, and that was something no one could take from me. The conversation with Sarah reminded me that while I had walked away from Claire, I hadn't walked away from everything. I still had people who cared about me, people who had seen me at my lowest and still stood by my side. That mattered more than anything. I wasn't alone, and I was never going to let myself feel that way again. As I sat there, the evening fading into night, I thought about the journey I had been on. The heartbreak, the loneliness, the anger, it had all been part of the process. But so had the healing, the self-discovery, and the growth. I had learned to trust myself again, to put my needs first, and to believe that I was worthy of happiness. And as I looked out the window at the city skyline, I knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. For the first time in my life, I was living for me. And that was enough. Another few months had passed since that quiet evening at the cafe with Sarah. Life had settled into a routine of sorts, but I had come to appreciate the simplicity of it. I was no longer rushing from one thing to the next, hoping to fill the void left by Claire. Instead, I was learning how to just be. My work still demanded a lot of my time, but now it felt more like a choice rather than a necessity. I was doing well, leading projects, meeting deadlines, and earning the kind of respect I'd always wanted in my career. But what was different this time was that I no longer relied on my job to define me. It was just one piece of my life, not the entire puzzle. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself at a local park, sitting on a bench with a cup of coffee in hand, watching families walk by. I had taken the day off just to get away from the city for a bit. There was something about the quiet of nature that calmed me. As I sat there, my mind wandered back to the time when Claire and I had talked about our future. We had planned out so many things: what our house would look like, the trips we would take, the kind of life we'd build together. But none of it had come to pass. And now, as I sat alone, I realized that I had been too focused on the life we had planned rather than the life that was unfolding in front of me. I thought about the journey I had taken over the last year. The pain, the heartbreak, the uncertainty. I had experienced it all, but I had also experienced growth. I had discovered a new version of myself, one who was no longer shackled by the past or by expectations. I had learned that I was capable of standing on my own, of finding fulfillment in things outside of a relationship, and that was something I could be proud of. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for me, not for someone else. I wasn't perfect, of course. I still had moments of doubt, moments when the loneliness crept in. I wasn't completely healed, and maybe I never would be. But I was okay with that. I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning how to move forward with it, accepting that it was a part of my story, but no longer in control of my narrative. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from Tyler, my college friend who had stuck by me through everything. He had been the one to remind me that I deserved better than what Claire had given me. He had been the one to encourage me when I wanted to give up on myself. Hey man, just wanted to check in. You good? I heard you're dating someone? I smiled at the message, feeling a mix of surprise and comfort. It had been a while since I'd thought about dating. I hadn't really been looking for anything serious, but I had been spending time with someone I'd met a few months ago, a woman named Natalie. She was a fellow architect I had met through work, and we'd hit it off instantly. She was intelligent, driven, and had a dry sense of humor that reminded me of myself in many ways. Our relationship wasn't anything official yet, But there was something about her that felt easy. It didn't feel rushed or forced. It felt like something worth exploring, slowly, without expectations. I quickly typed back, telling Tyler about Natalie and how things were going. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt open to the possibility of something new. Something that wasn't about finding a replacement for Claire, but about discovering who I could be with someone else. Someone who wouldn't expect me to lose myself in the process. The idea of starting over, of learning to trust again, didn't scare me anymore. I wasn't looking for validation or approval from anyone. I had already found those things within myself. And now, I was ready to see where this new chapter could take me. I wasn't going to rush it, but I wasn't going to close myself off either. If anything, I had learned that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I was okay with that. For the first time in years, I was content with the present. I had learned that life was about more than just the plans we make. It was about embracing the unexpected, about finding joy in the journey, even when it didn't go according to the script we had written in our heads. And as I finished my coffee and stood up to leave, I felt ready for whatever came next, because I had learned that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was already whole. 2 years had passed since I'd left that life behind, the life I'd shared with Claire. I had come so far, yet in some ways, it still felt like I was catching my breath. There were times when the echoes of the past would stir, the memories of what I'd lost, of what we could have been. But those moments didn't have the same weight they once did. They didn't feel like chains, keeping me bound to something that had already ended. Instead, they were fleeting, and I had learned to let them go. I had built a life for myself here in Seattle, something that was mine and only mine. My work had evolved from something I did to survive to something I did because I loved it. I was good at it. I had a team that respected me, projects that challenged me, and a clear path ahead. But more than that, I had learned to enjoy the small things again, those quiet moments where I wasn't measuring my worth against someone else's success. Those simple, peaceful moments I had forgotten about when I was so focused on Claire's dreams and on the life I thought we were supposed to have. Then there was Natalie. I'd been spending more time with her, slowly getting to know her, letting something real build between us. We hadn't rushed into anything, and honestly, I was grateful for that. For the first time, I was learning what it meant to be with someone without any pressure, without the ghosts of past relationships hanging over me. With Natalie, I didn't feel the need to apologize for who I was or to apologize for what I'd been through. She didn't need me to be someone else, and that made all the difference. But even as I felt things slowly shifting between us, a part of me was still cautious. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let someone else in completely. I had worked so hard to become independent again, to find peace within myself. The idea of losing that, of needing someone else, felt like something I wasn't entirely prepared for. And yet, there was something about Natalie that made me want to try. Something about the way she made me laugh, the way we could spend hours talking without ever running out of things to say. I felt a connection with her, one I hadn't felt with anyone in years. I knew, though, that I had to take it slow. I wasn't the same person I was when I first met Claire. I wasn't the man who was willing to lose himself for the sake of someone else's happiness. I had learned the importance of self-respect, the importance of knowing what I needed, and I wasn't about to forget that. But I also knew that life wasn't about shutting yourself off from the possibility of love. It was about finding the right balance, being whole on your own, but open enough to let someone else in when the time was right. One evening, after a long week of work, I found myself walking with Natalie along the waterfront. The city lights reflected off the water, and there was a calmness in the air, a peacefulness that made everything feel just a little bit more in place. We didn't talk much, just walked side by side, letting the silence stretch between us. It felt natural, easy. "You know," she said after a while, breaking the quiet, "I've really enjoyed getting to know you, Ethan. You're not like the others I've dated." I looked over at her, unsure of what she meant. The others? She shrugged, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. The ones who always seem to have something to prove, or the ones who are just searching for something they can't find in themselves. You seem like you know who you are now. Her words caught me off guard. It was a simple observation, but it felt like a recognition of the journey I had been on, of the person I had worked so hard to become. I smiled, not really knowing what to say. For the first time in a while, I felt seen. I've had to do a lot of figuring out, I said finally, my voice quiet, but I think I'm getting there. She nodded, her expression softening. I can see that. And I like who you are, Ethan. I like where you're going. The honesty in her voice was comforting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to prove anything to her. And that felt like a gift. We stopped walking and stood by the water for a moment, just taking it all in. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but in that moment, I was okay with not knowing. I had learned to let go of the need for certainty, the need for a plan. Life had its own rhythm, and I was learning to trust it again. I'm glad you're here, I said, turning to look at her. And I'm glad I'm here too. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a real sense of peace. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready for it. In life, it's essential to recognize that your worth isn't defined by others, and growth often comes from the hardest challenges. Don't lose yourself in relationships or career paths. Take the time to understand who you truly are and what you need. Healing isn't about forgetting the past, but about moving forward, learning from it, and finding peace within yourself. Embrace change. Take things slowly when necessary, and never be afraid to walk away from situations that no longer serve you. True fulfillment comes from within, and sometimes the hardest thing you can do is let go to make space for something better.